Well, thank you all so much for being here. We would like to first start by thanking the Taub Foundation for their generous support of our MSW students who have completed practicum-based leadership projects as Taub Fellows in Aging. And so thank you so much to Julia and team there. We'd also like to thank our students for your wonderful work as Taub Fellows, and we're so excited to hear your presentations to learn all about what you've been doing. So we're gonna jump right in. We'll start with Brianna Patton-Williams, whose title of the presentation is Taub Fellowship on Aging, Reframing Aging in Trenton, and her practicum is at Trenton Health Team. So I'll turn it over to Brianna.
Thank you. And hello, I'm Brianna Payton-Williams, and give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, hopefully you all can see it, and if not, just let me know. So like she mentioned, my topic is on reframing aging in Trenton. So just a quick overview on what my project is and what this presentation will entail. So first off, I'll start with just defining what is ageism. I think it's always good to kind of just set the stage and define what it is, and why that's kind of the focus of what sparked this topic. I'll give a quick overview of where I'm doing my field placement at Trenton Health Team, as well as kind of an overview of what my project is and what the overall goal was working with the community health workers, as well as the different steps I took working with that specific group to reframe aging within the organization and ultimately, hopefully, throughout Trenton, as well as some of the key findings with the pre-training survey, as well as the post-training survey that was provided to the community health workers, and kind of just looking ahead of maybe how this project can continue on. So just kind of setting the stage of what is ageism. I've done many iterations of this presentation before at my old job. So this is kind of near and dear to my heart working with older adults. And so ageism is something that really does impact older people, but not just older people, but everyone that's aging. And so ageism, which is the discrimination based on age, is a reality that impacts older people in their day-to-day, whether we notice it or not. And I will say, even just with defining it, it's one of those isms that people don't usually think about. I think it's an ism that kind of gets pushed to the back burner. And when working with older people and understanding ageism, it was found that about 82% of older adults experience some form of ageism on a daily basis. Whether we notice it, whether we don't, we're all aging, we're all going through this natural process. But unfortunately, what it's thought to be about aging and how we perceive older people is often a cycle of negative stereotypes and perceptions. And when thinking about ageism here in Trenton, which is the capital of New Jersey, we know about 23% of residents in Trenton live below the poverty line. We know that health disparities and health outcomes are especially dire, I guess I'll say, here in Trenton, and it is really a big issue. And so when thinking about ageism, the discrimination based on age, coupled with negative health outcomes here in Trenton, I really saw an opportunity to bring this training to the community health workers who work specifically with the community. Ageism, specifically in healthcare, and I'll give a quick overview of Trenton Health Team in a second, is really a reality that impacts not just older adults, but just everyone in our society. And so I always reemphasize remembering that ageism doesn't just impact one demographic of people, it impacts all of us, whether we notice it or not. And so who is Trenton Health Team? So this is my employment-based field placement. So I work there as a program manager for policy and advocacy. So Trenton Health Team, we are a multi-sector partnership. We're a nonprofit based in Trenton, downtown Trenton. And our goal really is to improve the health and well-being for folks in Trenton, but really throughout Mercer County. And our work at the organization, it's focused in many program areas. We focus on a number of issues throughout the county. But just a couple that is kind of key to the work that we do. It includes housing, maternal health, food access, harm reduction, care management, you name it, we're really involved in the work in the community. And so the focus of my project really was working with the community health workers. They are the ones that are on the front lines. They're the ones that are in the community working directly with residents throughout Trenton and Mercer County. And they are within our care management team. So they are the folks that are providing direct care for residents, whether it's access to food, access to government benefits, to ensure that people can stay in their community and have the support that they need. And I specifically chose them for this project, knowing that they, one, work with older people, but they also work with a diverse population of individuals, and recognizing that with reframing aging, it's not just with older people, it's reframing aging across all lifespans. And so that's kind of why I picked that demographic specifically within the organization to provide this training. So what is my project? So like I mentioned, it's focused on reframing aging in Trenton. So the overall goal was to provide the community health workers at THT with the reframing aging principles. And this is structured in a training that I've done before. This is guided by the Gerontological Society of America. They're kind of the masterminds of this training. And so I really work to adapt it to cater to the CHWs, knowing that the work I do here at the organization is focused on health and public health. And so the goal of that was to provide the training. And so hopefully once they complete it and have the resources and the tools, they can be more mindful of their language, knowing that reframing aging is rooted in our communications, and how we talk about aging and older people, and hopefully ultimately reframing aging and creating a more age inclusive trend. And so the different steps that I took to hopefully get to the end goal, which is to reframe aging. So the first step was providing the CHWs with a pre-training survey. And so this was helpful for myself just to understand, how do they understand implicit bias, which is something that is unconscious thoughts that we all do in terms of our framing and how we talk, but also understanding, how do they understand ageism? Do they understand what is ageism and the definition, how it relates to their work, and just on a personal level, how they interact and perceive older people? So that was really the first step for me to understand what was kind of the baseline for that and how I would structure the training and where that focus might have to be. So once that training, or once that survey, excuse me, was completed, we then provided the reframing aging training. And I will preface, this training is broken into 3 parts. I only provided the first part because the training in itself is 3 hours long, and being mindful of people's time and scheduling. So I really provided the foundation of the training. And that really kind of walked through, what is ageism? What does ageism look like in healthcare? Why we need to reframe aging, and how they can actually practically incorporate the tools of reframing aging into their work, whether it's simple things like saying an older person instead of a senior citizen, or thinking more largely in terms of our materials and how we provide case management. So it really provides the full gamut of what are the first steps that you can do to reframe aging in your work. And so once that training was provided, I then did a post-training survey. So after they've completed the training, did the initial survey, it was really to understand, how have you applied the work so far over that past month or so? Were there any roadblocks, and just how was the experience for you overall? So that was kind of the 3-step process for my project. So some of the key findings from the initial survey: the survey itself was a mixture of about 10 questions. Like I mentioned, it was some questions of just, how do you understand ageism in your life, but also on a professional level. I also threw in some questions of quote unquote ageist statements to understand, how did they perceive it? Was it something that they used in their language? Was it something that they noticed, okay, this is a bit ageist and a bit swampy, probably shouldn't use it. And so some of the interesting results that I will say in terms of the first question, or some of the initial questions, one was, have stereotypes of aging influenced your perception of older people? And there was a big response of no, which was good to hear. And so we know for the baseline in terms of their implicit bias and how they understand ageism, there was definitely a clear consensus of, there wasn't a big incorporation of negative stereotypes in their work. But what was interesting is when throwing in some of those kind of swampy phrases and languages, there was a mixture of responses in terms of, did people use it or did they not? And I think it's important to recognize too, in the culture that we live in, that phrases like over the hill or senior moment are phrases that we hear all the time. So I think what was interesting when doing the survey is, I think it forced people to think a little bit differently, especially with framing that you probably weren't thinking about. So it was a mixture of responses and was helpful for me to just understand what was people's kind of baseline. And I'm moving fast, and you can stop me if you have questions. I know I only have 15 minutes. So just the framing of the training itself, it was broken into 4 or 5 different sections. And this kind of just walks through how the training took place over that hour. So like I mentioned, it kind of started with creating kind of the baseline of understanding what is ageism and what is implicit bias, like I did before in this presentation, really defining it and saying it for what it is, because it's one of those isms that people kind of forget about. The second component of it was talking about why framing matters. And framing essentially is how you talk in the day to day. Me talking right now in this sentence, that's framing. And so it was kind of really honing in of the words you say and how you say it matter, whether you notice it or not. And you could say a statement that in your mind you're thinking you have one intention, but actually how it's being perceived is completely different. And really tying that back to if you're saying something that is ageist, even if you're thinking it's not ageist, people are perceiving your words in a different way. And that has an implication not just in how we talk, but the policies and the programs and thinking about how we actually support older people. So really kind of diving into why does framing matter? And the third component was talking about kind of the swamp of aging. This is a term that I did not coin. This is from the GSA. And this is kind of talking about the different cultural models, whether it's the us versus them, kind of that othering of older people, the ideal versus perceived. I always say people sometimes have this like superstar older adult who's running like a 10K marathon, when in reality, aging and what it means to be an older adult, it's not a monolith. So kind of walking through both the negative side of the quote unquote swamp, but also looking at the positive side of the swamp where we can look at ageism and thinking about how we combat it as a collective responsibility. And so kind of walking through the different ways of how we see ageism, and kind of what that next step, which is kind of providing the tips and the tricks, which I think is usually most helpful for folks because I've done this training a couple times and people say, okay, you've said all this, but like, how do I actually apply it? So that last step was providing practical tools, whether it's the shaping of your words, being mindful of the images that you use, or thinking about when you're going into communities, not just working with older people, but people of all ages, what are the ways that you can actually incorporate these principles? And so after providing that training, the CHWs had to complete a post-training survey. And these are just some of the key findings and some of the interesting things that I've kind of captured from it. Overall, 85% of the CHWs and about 10 people participated in the training itself, but only a small handful actually completed the post-training survey. So we got about 7 responses. About 85% felt pretty confident with using the reframing aging in their work. And in terms of how people actually used it, they kind of hit the nail on the head of what I was hoping to see is people used it to advocate for their clients. And, they work with a number of different agencies with providing government assistance and just different services to make sure people are able to meet ends meet. Also, they've incorporated it just in how they talk in the day-to-day when working with older people, but also when working with providers and doctors, because here at THT, we work largely with people in the medical field as well as with state agencies who also provide those services, and just, in their everyday language as well. And so just kind of looking ahead after providing this training of where I could potentially go next with it. A couple of ideas that are on my head. I know this training was specifically only provided to the community health workers at my organization, but there might be an opportunity to either provide the training again live or providing the recording to the staff members. So this is a resource for them. The CHWs are largely the folks working in the community, but staff members like myself, I do go into the community, but in a different capacity. And so it might be helpful for something to extend to the full staff. Another potential idea is expanding the training in itself. I mentioned this is only part 1 out of, I'd say, part 3 of the training. So there could also be an opportunity, depending on interest, to share the additional components that really kind of dive more into the framing and the narratives that the GSA put together. And then another idea also, we have a DEI committee at our organization that does a lot of activities working with staff members. And of course, ageism is one part of the DEI work. And so that also could be an opportunity working with them beyond the training itself, but just seeing how do we incorporate ageism into our DEI work that we have internally within the organization. So that is my presentation. If you have any questions, let me know. I know I spoke fast, so any questions, please feel free to ask. And that's that.
Thank you so much, Brianna. That was an amazing presentation. I see Julia has a question, so I'm gonna turn it over to her.
Thank you, Brianna. That was really interesting and encouraging to hear that you created such a nice training program and had good results. Would it be possible for you in the future to consider sharing that training with some CSWs that a group that I know of in Passaic County that I think could really benefit from what you've created?
Yeah, of course, I'd be open. The more the merrier.
Okay, we can follow up with that outside the meeting, and I can put you in touch with the person who supervises that program.
Great.
Does anyone have any other questions for Brianna?
I have a comment and a question. And first, I'm so glad that you tied ageism into DEI, because in most cases when we're talking about inclusion, age is not part of that inclusion discussion or the diversity discussion. So I'm really glad that you acknowledged that. But I was amused that your first question in your slides, when you asked people if they are impacted or influenced or have ageism in their own behavior, so many said no. But then when I was looking at the third graph on that page, it looks like they really do. They think they're not, but I took your results as they really do. Even if they consciously don't think they are, subconsciously they are. And that's, I think, where the training will have a big impact.
Exactly. Yep. It comes back to the implicit bias and not
Yeah.
knowing, conscious or unconscious, 100%.
Yeah.
Any more questions before we move on? Okay, well, thank you so much, Brianna. We really appreciate it. Our next speaker is Sarah Manship. Sarah's presentation title is New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well 2024 Community Survey, and her practicum is from the New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well. So I'm going to pass it over to Sarah.
Hello. All right. So as Clara was saying, my fellowship project was a community survey that we did statewide at NJA for individuals 60 plus who consider New Jersey their primary residence and they live within the community. So what I'll be going over throughout my presentation, I'm going to start with a little bit of background about NJR and a little bit about the project. Then I want to go over the project plan that we use to keep on track, to make sure that it fit within the time of my placement and that we were kind of happy where we were landing towards the end. Then we'll talk about project execution and some lessons learned real time throughout the survey period. Then I want to look at the demographics of who responded to our survey. And after that, we'll compare that to the American Community Survey results for that particular group of 60 plus New Jersey residents. And we're pulling together some initial high-level findings, which we'll include here. And I want to talk about our next steps as well. Right, so I'll start with the agency, New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well. I know most of you on the call are familiar with the organization, but it was previously called New Jersey Foundation for Aging and was rebranded in 2021. The organization is well known for the annual conference, which brings professionals together, and that is on Friday, May 17th, and there's still plenty of room if you would like to register for that. And also the organization brought the Elder Economic Index to New Jersey, which was really helpful in understanding specific New Jersey needs. But the organization was looking to maybe pivot a little bit and have a new focus and gain some understanding of the community which we serve. So we started with the concept of wanting to develop a community survey and to hear the opinions and experiences from older residents themselves. We asked New Jersey specific questions about whether or not they were familiar with services. Even going back to Brianna's presentation, we wanted to understand, if they felt discrimination or felt targeted by scams. We had housing, transportation questions. I'll go into that a little bit later. So, and some kind of starting to talk about next steps is that the idea was we want to build this community survey in order to complete some strategic planning at multiple levels. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So this is our roadmap, how we completed the survey, got it ready, and gave us enough time to analyze the data. So we officially kicked off at the end of October and used that time to put together a planning report, which included, what were our goals and benchmarks and targets for the survey. And that was completed in mid-November. And that's when we started developing the questions and the methods and the distribution channels that we would use for the survey. I was also able to, I'm here on the like greenish swim lane, interview stakeholders for developing the survey. So I wanted to talk to people who fit the criteria that would respond to the survey, but also aging professionals to understand, kind of what they were interested in. And some themes really came up here during those interviews, really around long-term care planning in the community. And, how, if people have feel like they've saved enough, if maybe they have coverage or, so I gained a lot of insight in those interviews with the different stakeholders who my MSW supervisor put me in touch with. Then we spent the next few months, well, I had winter break, but then over the next few months, we prepped the survey materials, distributed them at the end of January, and since then we've been collecting and analyzing the data. When we distributed the community survey, we started blasting out through the socials. So we had LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, we had a flyer, and connected with a large amount of our network. So the age-friendly networks, libraries, senior centers, our newsletter. And, sometimes I would show up to like my day job at Division of Aging Services and see somebody had sent it out as well. It was just so exciting to see how far and wide the reach went with the community survey. We're at 1,428 responses and keep getting surprised by more entries, even though we kind of officially closed the survey. And I've stopped including responses in my evaluation, but moving forward for the final report, Kathy, who's on the call, is going to include those additional responses. What happened early on, what we saw was right out of the gate, most of the respondents were white women who lived in particular counties. And so the concern was we weren't getting the representation of how diverse New Jersey is. So we pivoted a little bit. We emailed our state senators, assembly persons. I did some boots on the ground. I went to the senior center in Warren County because we didn't have enough responses from Warren County. And we had other ideas, and moving forward, if the community survey is a thing that is done annually or in any sort of time period, we talked about including translation efforts, which would need funding, and I think more boots on the ground, because the population that we're working with is not chronically online, and we really need to be making those face-to-face connections. This is our demographic snapshot. We have a nice distribution of age. The majority were between 65 and 74. We did end up still being predominantly female. I'll compare that to the American Community Survey, but we were, again, predominantly female responses. A little info about marital status. We had a great range of respondents with varying income. And we use that income information to look at eligibility for New Jersey programs. And then also we ask individuals for race and ethnicity identification. And so that data is on the screen as well. One effort was to compare what we were getting with the population in New Jersey to feel like we were getting representative data. So on the upper left, you'll see the county comparison. On the left is the percentage of the population in those counties. And on the right is the percentage of our responses throughout those counties. So in our final report, anybody who's under like 2% we're not really diving down into the results for those counties, but they are included in the overall responses. Again, with age range, I think we did pretty good with who we targeted and then based on the community survey. And ultimately, we were able to get back on track with respondents from different racial identities, which was really exciting. And I think a result of our pivoting and response from the board members and ideas of new networks. So here are some of the high level findings. I'm sorry, I'm taking a very long time. Awareness of services. So this is one of my passion areas. As I said, my day job is with the Division of Aging Services, and I'm really proud of the services that our state has, but concerned that people don't know about it. So some of the quotes that I pulled out from the open responses: my husband and I don't need these services yet, as we were both still working. I like knowing they're there, though. And I think this highlights the outreach that's needed with these programs for people to be aware that they exist and that they're eligible. That was another thing is I had a single female, never married, in the $75,000 to $100,000 bracket of income. And she said she's slightly over income for most services, which is true for like Senior Gold and PAT, even though they increase the eligibility. But there are other services that they may not know about and be eligible for. I want to pull out, when we looked at income, 61% of the 406 respondents who make less than $50,000 were unaware of or have not applied for PAT or Senior Goal, which are the prescription support services. And then similarly, for individuals who stated that they sometimes or often have difficulty paying for their utilities, they're not aware of the utility assistance programs, which I listed here. And then I wanted to look a little bit at the evidence-based wellness programs, the Part 3D programs that are offered through the state. We asked the respondents if they had ever struggled with balance or mobility. 377 individuals answered yes, that they did within the last 12 months have an issue with that. And within those respondents, 90% were not aware of the wellness programs that are used to target balance issues. Another surprising thing we saw was that doctors were a really present form of information for the older individuals who responded. And I think that that is a great opportunity for networking, for getting messages out, is through doctors' offices. Housing, a large number of individuals live alone or with a spouse or significant other. And then we did get a lot of responses of multi-generational families, which was very exciting. And some people had said that they had a desire to downsize, but felt that there were not enough options within their community if they wanted that. We also wanted to understand how a current home is suited for individuals to age in place, but we wanted to take out the assumption that the 55 plus communities are already suited for aging in place. And so after we did that, 41% agreed that their home is suited for them to age, which is great. But, looking at disagreed and not sure, there's a large group of people who are not sure if they're in the right place to age. Transportation, a lot of individuals have still drive. Some have scaled back or stopped or had never driven. And these responses were very different based on the counties, which is expected because public transportation is better in some counties, Essex, Bergen. Where I live in Hunterdon County, it's like, public transportation is not really available. So I want to stop here and talk about our next steps today. We're doing the final Taub presentation. And then the next step is on May 17th at the conference, which I referenced earlier, the NJL conference. I'll be giving a presentation on the preliminary findings, a little bit more in depth than what we're doing today. And then after I am done with NJA, Kathy's going to continue on and do the final recommendations report. And my personal sort of passion. Oh, and excuse me, and Kathy's also going to include some of this in the strategic plan for the organization. And then finally, the Division of Aging Services requested the data that we collected. And my, personal passion project is getting involved after graduation when I switched to full time with Division of Aging Services. We're working on the state strategic plan on aging. I want to apply these findings to that plan. And my ultimate goal is to get a multi-sector plan on aging in New Jersey and to really use these learnings to influence those plans. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for the funds. I really appreciated that, so I could do this work and just learn an awful lot. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for an amazing presentation. And I'm just going to open it up. Is there any questions for Sarah?
Sarah, I was going to say, first of all, I know that Kathy was thrilled to have you working with her, and thank you so much for everything you offered in that position. I was curious about your position at the division. Was that something you had before coming to Rutgers, or was that obtained while you were a student through your experience at Rutgers?
It was my first year placement. And I have to admit, I was a bit cynical going into state work. I wasn't quite sure how I would enjoy that or maybe feel frustrated by it. And I loved it. And I loved the people I worked with. And somebody on one of my first days told me, there's a lot of red tape here, but our job is to make sure people get services. And that was really kind of a changing moment for me. And I really, I like it at the division. So but I wasn't familiar with it at all before I joined Rutgers. It was my first placement. And then they kind of hung on to me for a different summer or winter break, and then a few days here and there during my NJA internship. But yeah.
Well, congratulations for getting a full-time job there. Now we have a liaison.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Are there any other questions for Sarah before we move on to the next presentation? Okay, so I'm going to now pass it over to Gurdine Facey, whose program or whose presentation is titled Feed the Feeder's Assistant Program. And her practicum is at Avalon Rehabilitation and Care Center. So go ahead, Gurdine.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jardine Facey. I am the director for the social service department in the nursing home in Wayne, and that's how my project started. So, just a brief introduction. The project that I developed is Adapt a Feeder Assistant Program. And the reason why this project was chosen was I had a lot of challenges like figuring out what to do in this nursing facility because it's like there is so much demands and everything. But I realized that this program will benefit not only just the resident but the staff as well because very often we are like very short staff when it comes to CNA and nurses, and the residents are not being fed on time or they're not being fed any at all because by the time it comes around for them to have their lunch with the or breakfast or dinner with the staff and they probably don't want it anymore or something else happened. And then we realize that it's becoming a problem because the families are complaining as well as they are at more risk of aspiration or decline in health, losing weight, among other stuff. So, an introduction of my field placement, as I said, I work at Avalon Rehabilitation and Care Center in Wayne. And the mission statement of the nursing facility is we aim to give patients the support and resources they need to live healthier lives. So, branching off that mission statement, I figured that feeding assistant program will be in coordination with that. So, we provide post acute care, memory care, rehabilitation, cardiology, pulmonary, neuro rehab, nursing and restorative, um, physician services, specialty services, respite care, and long-term care. So we have two units. The first floor is the subacute unit where residents that are in need of rehabilitation, they're here for probably 2 to 3 weeks. And then we have the long-term care unit on the second floor where they live here at an extended number of time, 30 days or over. And just a picture, this is one of the nurses feeding one of the residents. And then the target group for this project was the department heads. The reason why I targeted the department head was because we have a fixed schedule. We're here Monday to Friday from 9 to 5. Some are here from 7 to 3. And then we rotate weekends, what is called manager on duty. And then as the project progresses, I do intend to incorporate family members and other staff in the program. But for right now, the department heads are the one that have the most fixed schedule. So I figured they will be a better for us to actually use to start the program as a trial basis just to see what it's like and then move on from there. And the goal of the project is to serve both the resident and the staff with major emphasis on the residents, of course. It is to retrain, educate, and reevaluate the program every couple of months just to make updates as necessary and to see the progress there is. So the project really came from CMS because they had a feeding assistant program, which I used as a guide to steer this project, as well as I use a dietitian and a speech therapist and nursing to assist with the project. So the dietitian sees every resident whenever they're admitted in the facility at first, as well as a speech therapist in order to decide what diet they will be on and what type of food they will be eating. And then the project will benefit the residents so they can be fed on time to prevent further illness and assist staff where they're shot in order to prevent burnout. So, just to give a breakdown of the diets that we have in the facility, so for anyone that doesn't know,
Jardine,
we
and
yes,
my sincerest apologies in interrupting your flow, but I think we might not be able to see your slides anymore. I didn't want you to go too far and not be able to see your beautiful presentation here. Did you go full screen? Like, did you go into like
okay, so
slide share, like a presentation mode? I think because we're still
e-
on
yeah,
before project goal. Okay. Again, so sorry to interrupt you.
oh, before project goal. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'll try to go back. Just let me know if you're seeing anything right now.
So
I'm
we still
seeing the
see.
definition of diet slide.
Yeah, I think if you don't press the presentation
You're
mode,
seeing the diet side. That's where.
Well, so yes, so in the Zoom, right? So if you were to reshare, you could see the option to share kind of this the face interface that we're seeing is the one that has the slides on the left and then kind of the editing interface on the right versus the big presentation mode that's like full screen kind of thing. So I think when right now, yes, perfect. So either if you
So
want to
I'm
try to
on the big
reshare.
presentation mode.
Okay, yes, which we can't
Okay,
see
so I
that. So
should
when
go
you're
back.
advancing on that one, we're still kind of a few slides behind you. So I'm so sorry for interrupting you.
All right, so let me. No problem. I'll just try to share it again.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so I am back. All right, so how are we doing now?
yeah, I think if you just stay on this slide and don't do the press the presentation mode, you can just advance. We can see it pretty nicely this way. So yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, so I
Perfect.
just.
yeah, just go
All
like,
right,
yeah,
so I
that's
think I
perfect.
was at.
Keep staying.
How is it now?
Great.
Okay,
Yes.
so just do it this way.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I think
all
that'll work
right,
really well.
no
Awesome. Okay,
problem.
please continue. Thank you so much.
So no problem. So definition of diet, we have the regular diet, and that is no exception. Every food is included. Pretty much everything the resident is allowed to eat. Then we have the renal diet, and that's for residents that are on chemotherapy or dialysis. So their food has to be a particular way, so less sodium or anything that will interact with their dialysis. Then we have the puree diet, and that's for residents that have swallowing problem or respiration or they just can't manage thickness of the food. So everything is in blended portions. So they still get the regular meal. It's just that everything is blended into like somewhat of a semi-liquid. And then we have no added salt, and those are for the residents that are diabetic. So no sodium whatsoever is in your meal. And then we have the thickening liquid. We have residents that are here that they cannot take regular water or any liquid that is of regular content. So we have a specialized food that is sent over for them in terms of like drinking. So their water, everything is like honey thick. And then we have chop diet, and those are for the residents that are unable to swallow the food in big portions. So the kitchen will like cut them into small bites for them to be able to swallow. Another picture, and this is our administrator feeding another resident. We were having a birthday club. And then just to give a breakdown of what the proper feeding technique is like. And as I said, most of the information for the feeding was from CMS, and then the dietitian, myself, and the speech therapist and our DAN actually like did a revision to suit the needs of the resident. So when feeding residents, um, we're told not to rush. We have to make sure that we wash our hands before we begin, just to make sure that hygiene and everything is good for the resident. Then we serve one course meal at a time, and we use a metal or a hard plastic teaspoon or a perform spoon for those on the mince or puree diet. And we ensure that the food is not dangerously hot. So usually the staff, they don't serve hot meal to the residents. It's usually at a warm temperature. They don't serve it cold as well. So it has to be in between. We offer small bites at a time. Bring the spoon to where the resident can sit and give the resident time to open his or mouth. Then we allow time for chewing and swallowing, and try to observe as they swallow, just to make sure that they're swallowing in the right way that they're supposed to. And then we check that the resident chin remain slightly tucked to safest swallowing. Check that there is minimal amount of food residue in the mouth after swallow. Alternate liquids with solids unless the plan of care indicates otherwise. Do not mix food together unless resident requests this or the care plan allows it. So for the last one, so if they have, say for example, they have vegetable, they have rice, and they have chicken on the plate, we usually serve like the rice first, then the veggies after, and then the meat after. So we do it in a portion unless the diet allows us to actually mix the food together. Just because probably there are some pieces in the rice that is too thick to mix with the vegetable or vice versa. And the dietitian, so she sees the residents on a quarterly basis just to check on their diets in case a resident need an upgrade or a downgrade in diets, or if there's a significant change. So if the resident has declined, then they will downgrade the diet. And if they have improved in terms of health, then the dietitian will do a screening as well as the speech therapist in order to upgrade the diet. And then we have continuing. So we cue the resident when to open their mouth. And that's if they're like alert, because some of the residents, one of the reasons why they are on the feeding list is because they have dementia. So they are not able to feed themselves, or they don't remember to feed themselves or how to feed themselves. If the resident begins to cough or choke, stop providing food and allow time before starting again. Report coughing, choking, pocketing, drooling, spitting to registered staff overseeing the dining room services. And I just put it in a notation just to let everybody know that the training was done by the dietitian and the nursing. And this is another picture, and this is our dietitian. She was feeding a resident. Okay, she usually goes in like for the residents that are on the feeding list. She goes in like once a week or so just to feed them herself to be able to have an idea as to what's happening with them. And then, of course, Hand washing is a part of hygiene and feeding, so we have to make sure that the environment is safe for the resident and whenever we're feeding them. So the ADON, who is in charge of education, she offers an in service on a regular basis about hand washing. So I decided to put this in the system on in the project, sorry, just to make sure that every staff who is not on the nursing team have an idea how to wash their hands, because this is also a CMS requirement. The state requires us to be able, every staff, to know how to do proper hand washing. So the first thing that we do is wet our hands with clean running water, whether warm or cold. Turn the tap off and then apply soap. Lather your hands by rubbing them together with the soap, and then lather it back and forth between fingers and in between your nails. Then you're gonna scrub your hands for at least 20 seconds, and they have what it says to hum the birthday song while you're doing it, just to make sure that you're washing your hands at the required time. Then you're gonna rinse your hand on the clean running water. Wash your hands first with a, then dry with a towel or an ear dryer, and then you're gonna use a towel to turn the pipe off. So after you finish washing your hands, the goal is not to touch the pipe with your hands in order to recontaminate. So you're gonna use a towel to turn the pipe off. And then some social work skills that was needed for this project was research, because I had to do a lot of research in order to do this project, because I don't really have much experience when it comes to feeding elderly, and problem solving, of course, because I had no idea where to start when it comes to like developing a project for this facility. As I said, there's like so much areas that need addressing, and it was a challenge for me, like deciding what to do, because a part of me was struck on doing something regarding to mental health, because I realized that enough emphasis is not placed on mental health in the facility. But then working one weekend on MOD, I had to fill in and assist the CNAs to feed the resident because they were so short staffed, especially on the weekends. And then the department heads are not usually there on a weekend. So we had to figure out like what to do. And so we decided to have some staff like the concierge, the resident concierge, housekeeping and other departments working on the weekend and then taking off a day in the week in order to just make sure that everybody is covered. Critical thinking, organization, professionalism, advocating for the patients, of course, because I had to bring this to the department, give them a substantial reason why this project was needed, as well as the information, the research, and everything that will be needed, because this is not a paid for, it's just a voluntary service. And of course, we're taking away from our job description that we're supposed to be doing that work. So it's up to the staff to decide whether or not they wanted to participate, but everybody was on board. Like they saw the need for us to actually be a part of the project. And even though there will be times when we will not be able to fill in probably breakfast or lunch or dinner time, then usually if we're not, then the staff will say, okay, my schedule is booked, and then we'll try to find an alternation for somebody else to fill in. So we work together as a team to get it done. And okay, and then this is the ADON, and she is also assisting another project. So pretty much everybody in the department head, I think, except for me and the administrator, had nursing background. They all had CNA or they had the temporary nursing aid training. So everybody knew what it was in order to be a CNA. I never had any nursing experience, so I was one of the first person along with the administrator to have the training program, and then I assisted the DON, the dietitian, and the speech therapist in order to coordinate the service afterwards. Even though I was the one that developed the program, it was mostly run by the dietitian and the speech therapist in terms of training, because they had the expertise and the experience in order to do that. I just oversee the program to make sure that everything is in place, and then the residents that the staff, sorry, that would not be able to participate in the program at a specific time, then I'll find a replacement for them to assist the resident where needed. And then on the weekends, I'll try to figure out like which staff is gonna be on duty and to see if there was gonna be any shortages in any area that I could assist in any way. So I think I have to go back to the main screen now and stop sharing. If you have any questions for me?
Thank you, Jardine, for another amazing presentation. Really, really, really enjoyed it. I'm just gonna open up to questions from the group.
I was wondering, did people have resistance to it? When you talk about something as important and basic as washing hands, did you get resistance with people saying, I know what I'm doing with, they just weren't paying attention to the
Definitely.
details? And how did you handle any resistance?
Yes, we definitely had a lot of staff that had resistance. And one of the challenges that I had was that the staff in the facility, they are immigrants. So their English isn't as perfect. And so communication was also a challenge for us. And of course, we had to find ways like, because we have Asians, Spanish, and other staff on board. So we had to find somebody to translate where needed. And that was one of the biggest challenges. And in terms of like the hand washing, like we've had the state come in before and gave us like a tag because we weren't doing the hand washing properly even before the program. So this has always been something. So the resistance was just reinforcement, 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 especially from the ADON that is in charge of education, not only because of the program, but because of the state, and we're in survey for the state window as well. So it's like killing one bird with two birds with one stone, pretty much.
Julia, I see you have a question as well.
Yes, hi, Gerdine. Thank you so much for that presentation. I was very interested in hearing about it because I have my own parents in facilities right now, and my father has had struggles with eating, and I see how important it is, just the timing and the ability for someone to assist if the family member is not there to do that. And so I wondered how the extra expense of having one-on-one help was covered or is being covered in your project. Is this, you mentioned CMS, is there extra funding available to do this kind of work?
So CMS does have a program that is actually like they will pay a caregiver to actually, but it's like a 12-week long program that you have to be enrolled in. And it takes requirements that we didn't have the time in order to go through the system to do that. And that's the reason why we chose the department heads. And so for the future, that's going to be the goal for family members that actually want to be enrolled in the program and would want to get stipends or payment for that program while they're doing it, because of course the staff is being paid here, so regardless if they participate in the program or not, it's not going to take away from them, but it will be taken away from the family members to actually leave their busy life or whatever they have going on to be here on a daily basis or on the weekends. And that's one of the reasons why they weren't incorporated in the program at first, because we know they have a busy schedule. We have to think about transportation because many of the family members, they probably don't even live in the area. So the CMS program will be a good avenue for them because they do get some sort of stipends to accommodate their needs. But then there has to be more work in order to have that, because 12 weeks long to do a course and then moving into the program is a bit of a stretch right now.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions for Jardine before we move on to our final presentation? Okay, so last but not least, we have Amy Keishian. Her presentation title is "We Want to Hold Your Hand, Onboarding Volunteers with Encouragement and Reassurance." And her practicum is volunteer guardianship one-on-one. So, Amy, if you'd like to share your screen and begin the presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am sorry I was late. I somehow had the wrong link, which is great. Okay, so can you see my slides? That's a
We
no.
cannot. Oh,
How
now
about
we
now?
can. Great.
Okay. So yes, so I'm doing, just as an overview, I'm doing my fellowship, my internship at Volunteer Guardians One-on-One, which is an amazing, very small organization that matches compassionate volunteers with adults who lack mental and cognitive ability, who are in need of a guardianship throughout central New Jersey. That last part is changing right now, and that's part of what my project had to do with. There is a ton of change going on right now at Volunteer Guardianship. The current executive director, Julie Hanley, came on 2 years ago, and it has grown steadily since then, like slowly and steadily, very careful, step by step, and is expanding into Somerset County and I believe Morris County next. Which is great, but it's always been a very intimate organization. And so we wanted to make sure that everything that we did kept that sort of value, that it felt small and that we were in touch with everybody. This slide gives you the origin story, but there's so much more to it. So you guys know that when somebody becomes cognitively incapacitated, they need a trusted person to handle their fiduciary responsibilities. And in layperson's terms, this means that somebody has to manage their assets and make sure their bills get paid and make sure Social Security is deposited and probably sign them up for Medicare and Medicaid. And just to make sure that the person is cared for medically, overseeing their medical care, coordinating with their doctors, physically, that they're in a safe place. And we hope that they'll be cared for emotionally. I think most of the people in this room are familiar with the process of caring for a family member in this way. I know I have, and it is really not for the faint of heart, which tells you something about our volunteers. We recruit and train people who are willing to take on this very long-term project of being a guardian for somebody that they most likely didn't know before they were introduced as their guardian. These incapacitated, we used to call them wards of the state. We now refer to them as incapacitated people. And we have a relationship with adult protective services agencies so that they can let us know when they have somebody who needs a guardianship. And we do just tons of outreach to find these amazing volunteers. So obviously when we get the volunteers, one of the main things we do is to train them. And we had been using sort of the same training modality for a while, and we had to freshen it up. And what we wanted to do was make sure that we were in line with what people needed. And so we sent a survey out to present and past volunteer guardians. Um, I had wanted to send out this survey to like all the guardians in the state, and that was very difficult to do. And I wasn't able to coordinate with the state on that, which I was unhappy about. But I'm glad that we got, I mean, our volunteers all answered. So we had a good chunk of information about what would make their job easier. We got answers that we never expected that gave us whole new directions and subjects to put into the onboarding process for our volunteers. So these are some of the sorts of questions we were asking. I asked a lot of repetitive questions because I just thought there are different ways people are going to answer depending on how they're asked, which turned out to be true. We would get longer answers on different questions from different people. So, and then the answers were so, interesting. There was stuff that we hadn't thought about, a tip sheet for dealing with the banks. Um, uh, we didn't realize that some of the volunteers really felt like they needed to know how to open up to their IP and get to know them. A great idea that they had was a mentorship program between current and new volunteers, and a place for them to spend time together, such as a Facebook group, a private Facebook group. So that was very useful. We saw what they wanted was at the beginning to feel equipped and welcomed and like they had enough to start with. But since they are long-term volunteers, we needed them to be able to stay engaged, to deepen their knowledge, um, and to feel also equipped if they had a new IP and or that their IP situation changed and what do I do now? Um, we wanted to give them that knowledge in a way that they could work on slowly over a long period of time. So what we had was our handbook, which is very straightforward. And then my project was to create a resource guide that would go along that. And be less official, more personal, and provide deeper levels of engagement. So if the handbook is this guy, the resource guide is a little more, I would say, fun or engaging. These are some examples. Really, the one that I think is most important is, I'm telling on my age here, but all right, appropriate. Just the facts, ma'am, is our handbook. And then Tom Hanks over here is the deeper, longer term use of the resource guide. So I wanted to send something home with the volunteers that felt reassuring. I was reminded of these SRA um, boxes, the notes you would go through in order, and you would know what to grab when because they had tabs. I thought about recipe boxes and how you know that you've got all your information in one place. So when creating our cards, um, it really wasn't within the budget or within any kind of reasonable expectation to create these boxes or to have laminated cards that were put together with a spiral spine. But I still retained just the feeling of it by using very bold layouts and making it very clear by color coding what kind of information you were looking at. As I said, so here's just some examples. We have making decisions for your IP. This is like an introduction, and then here's a card on substituted judgment. That is a kind of interesting concept. It's something we learn about in social work school, but it might not be something that a new guardian really understands on a deep level. And it's tough. Like if your values are different from your IPs and you have to decide on life-saving measures, on how to handle their body after death, on whether they want to go into a care facility. You may have a very clear idea of what you think is right for them, but you have to go and look at everything you can to know your IP as well as possible and make your decisions based on what they would have wanted. It's easier if they have an advanced directive, but a lot of people don't. So, and then choosing a long-term care facility. I mean, when I started this project, I really didn't know how to do that. So I actually interviewed one of our existing guardians just to ask them what this whole process was. And I interviewed someone who worked at a long-term care facility as well. And some of the things just to look at In order to get this information, as I said, sometimes I interviewed people. Of course, I used our amazing survey. For subjects like what happens to the body when there's a brain injury, I went through peer-reviewed journals, found studies, read through them. We would often, let's say for like the Alzheimer's Association, they have their own information that's very reliable. Of course, I fact checked it, but often that they were at least a starting point to get to the information that was specific to the different things that our IPs might need. And then an interesting source of information was trainings with local agencies that are working with our population. Just yesterday, I did an amazing training with a domestic violence organization so that we could be better prepared to offer trauma-based and trauma-centered interactions. You know, this isn't therapy, but our guardians need to know how to most safely and comfortably approach these people that they have probably never met and who don't know them and who they need to be in a relationship with over a matter of years. The idea was that the volunteers would feel like they were well prepared, that the IPs would feel better served, not that they would like know what it was like before, but that their experience would improve, and that we would because we had these additional training materials, we would do less spending time on the phone with guardians who needed help and more time, on administration, and which would allow us to scale up in the way that we are. So I have been coordinating with my field supervisor, who's Julie Hanley, the executive director. And so she's been watching. I see her handbook as it changes. She sees my resource guide as it changes, and we go back and forth on what needs to happen next. We had access to each other's files, and it was a very wonderful experience to work to get to collaborate in that way. And upcoming, my resource guide will be incorporated into upcoming trainings and then provided to the volunteers along with the handbook electronically. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank my field placement, my cohort, our advisors, and of course, I want to thank the Taub Foundation for giving me this wonderful opportunity and providing me with the funds to do so.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for yet another amazing presentation. I'm going to open the floor to our attendees to ask any questions for Amy.
Am I still sharing?
Yes.
That's great.
Well, Amy, thank you for sharing that wonderful summation of your work. It sounds very comprehensive as far as going to the details of researching what happens to the body when there's a brain injury and things like that. There's a lot to learn and to keep adding to your guidebook. So it's really nice to hear that you have that opportunity to keep improving it and adding things that you're learning along the way. The guardianship role is so important, and knowing that there are people like you that care about doing it right is very rewarding for all of us to hear. So we thank you for the great work. I don't really have a specific question, but I just wondered if you said the organization is growing and expanding. Does that mean that so I guess the goal of that is to recruit more volunteers and train them, right, in different geographies of the state?
Correct, to reach out and also different populations, to reach the people with different backgrounds than we've been doing, and to ensure that their guardians are familiar to them as well, that we enable each community to hook up with people within their community, and to do that county by county. We're in Hunterdon County now, and then to reach out into other counties. So have an office in Somerset, have an office in Morris County.
That's wonderful. This has been a great opportunity for me to hear from you because I receive information from your organization, the organization you were placed with, and I got a good feeling about it, but I can't like distribute things to everybody I know just based on a good feeling. So it's helpful for me to know more about your organization so that like Kathy and I have access to lots of community leaders, and especially my contacts are more in northern New Jersey, but I'm happy to distribute the things that you send and your recruitment efforts so that the towns that we've been working with in the age-friendly community work can be aware that you're looking for volunteers.
And we're available to speak to groups anytime.
Great.
Any other questions for Amy?
Hi, Amy. I know your organization well. I know Kent and Chris. And I'm glad to hear of your expansion. So I just wanted to understand a little more. I love the idea of the box, but you are not doing that because of funding?
Yeah, and plus,
Uh,
so it's that would be an expensive thing to produce.
Yeah,
When I was in nursing school, we had to buy a little box and it was like $100.
yeah,
It didn't make sense, but also this is a living, breathing resource. It's a
mhm,
living, breathing document that's going to be changing and
okay,
expanding as needed. We're gonna, when we come up with new things that people might need to know about, just enrich it constantly.
yeah, okay.
So I
No, it's
like
a
that
great idea to have it
box.
all organized like that. I was really impressed by that.
Thank you.
All right, well, we want to just reiterate our thanks first to the Taub Foundation and Julia for your support. Without you, this wouldn't have been possible. And clearly, these projects are amazing and really had an impact on our fellows. So we want to really thank you for your generous support. I also want to thank all of the supervisors and collaborators that at our practicums. So where our fellows were placed, they were collaborating with a bunch of different people. Kathy was one of them. And we just want to thank you guys for supporting our Taub fellows, because without you, this wouldn't be possible. And then finally, we want to thank the fellows for your beautiful presentations, for putting this together, all the hard work that you do in addition to your classes and all the other obligations you have. So thank you. And the spirit of this fellowship is to encourage, work in aging, and that's what we're all passionate about. So it's just a wonderful program, and thank you all for your participation in it.